she went from going with like a whole congregation of saints that were going to travel to the Salt Lake Valley together to being the only member on this ship. Like, who knows, at the time she could have been one of the only women, for all we know, on this ship. Hello, welcome to another week of Mix It Up, Black History and the Restoration. I'm Taylor Ricks, and what we do here is we mix up a recipe while we mix up the restoration and learn about our Black African American early members of the church. So today we're going to be making a mess, but also we're going to be making some homemade chicken noodle soup. It's a cold, rainy day where I live, while we learn about Jane Hunter. So really quickly, this is just the broth, and then I just like to strain it. Oh, wish me luck. I just pour it into a strainer, into another bucket. This is when it's nice to be taller than 5'2", but unfortunately this is what I'm dealing with. There we go. And then we keep all the broth, and it separates the questionable things from the yummy things. As you can see, we've got bones and everything in here. Today though, I used a rotisserie chicken. My husband shredded it up for us and put it in the lid of the chicken. And so normally I'd have to go through and pick out like our good chicken from our bad chicken that we don't want to keep in the bones and stuff like that to put it in our soup. But today, since we already separated it ahead, we don't have to do that. So we have this, and we have this yummy, beautiful broth. And so we'll just add back in our chicken, a bag of peas. Fun fact, I'm not a fan of peas, don't care for them, but I love them in soup, and that's it. Just this soup too, I don't know, I'm weird. And then this is like just a package of carrots peeled and cut, and then a package of celery. I think they're like a pound or something of each one. Just get those in there. We'll throw it back on the stove. It'll keep making a yummy broth. You can add a little bit more seasoning at this point if you want. I'm gonna make noodles while we talk about Jane Hunter. And these noodles are kind of like a dumpling noodle almost, because they're thick. Like I don't use a noodle roller or anything. I just use my rolling pin. So they're kind of like a dumpling slash noodle. They're delicious, but they're also thick. And so yeah, that's what we'll get going on while we talk about Jane. So Jane, unlike everyone else that we've learned about so far, was born in London, England in November 19th, 1809. So she is just a few years younger than Joseph Smith, if that gives you any context. And while she lived there, we don't know a whole lot about her early life in England. I don't have a whole lot of detail on that. I don't even know about her parents or anything like that. But what I do know is that when she was 41 years old, she was taught by Elder Till, who we believe was a missionary that was like local, because we don't have any record of Elder Till in Salt Lake City. But he taught and baptized Jane in England, and that is where she learned the gospel. So when she was 41 years old is when she became a member of the church. So Jane, guys, I told you it was going to be messy, and I'm already making a mess. Okay, so she got baptized by Elder Till, and a few years later, she was reading in the church news, and she realized that many were moving to Salt Lake, and she wanted to do the same. So she learned from the church news about the immigration fund, and she wanted to be a part of that. And so she learned that if she paid £8, she could secure a place on a ship to move to the Salt Lake Valley with the other saints who were leaving England as well. So she saved up her money and paid her £8 so that she could make the passage over here. What's interesting about that is in the census, it says that she was a launderer and did laundry for people to earn her living. So normally we wouldn't think of that as a very high-paying job, but it paid enough for her to be able to save up this money and to be able to give it to the church for her immigration fund, which shows that she wasn't the poorest of the poor in England, that she was able to do that. But the church also only helped people pay their passage over if they showed a significant financial need. So we know that she at least had a financial need significant enough that the church was willing to help with her passage over. So they were all planning on coming over on the ship called the Marshfield, but it just kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed and held back, and so finally the time had come for them to board the ship. So she headed to Liverpool, where the ship would be leaving from, with other saints, and they boarded it in March 1854. So finally they were able to get on, and they, I guess, I don't know if they sat in the harbor or what, but apparently they didn't take off until April 4th. And they boarded it in the middle of March. Took off April 4th, and then on April 5th, the doctor came around to check everybody to make sure that nobody had any kind of like disease that would cause, you know, issues after being on a ship with each other for 3 months. And he cleared most of the saints. However, when he got to Jane, he was concerned, and I guess it became a topic of conversation among the passengers because the ship was headed to dock in New Orleans. So the plan was that she would pay, so she paid her $8 to secure her ticket, or her £8. And then when she got there, she had to pay 2 more pounds, so now she had paid 10. And then the idea was that she would get to America with the other saints, and the Perpetual Immigration Fund, funded by the church, would help her pay for her wagon passage to the Salt Lake Valley. By the way, sorry half my head is cut off. I just figure you probably want to see what I'm doing more than you want to see the top of my head. I could be wrong. Camera angles aren't exactly my strength. So she, what were we talking about? Okay, so she had paid her 10 pounds. Gosh, you guys. And then she paid her 10 pounds. Then the doctor checked her. And he made it a topic of conversation that the concern to him was that they were going to be headed to New Orleans on this ship. And he brought it up to the leadership on board, which was Elder William Taylor. He was the elder that was he was like organizing basically a little congregation on the ship. Like he was assigning callings, but the callings were like cooking, cleaning, you know, ship duties, that kind of thing. So they had like a little, kind of like a little congregation on the ship. So he brought it up, the doctor brought it up to Elder William, like, hey, we're gonna be docking in New Orleans, and I'm concerned because Jane is black. And his concern was that since New Orleans was one of the biggest slave trade ports, I think South Carolina had a bigger one, North Carolina, but it was one of the biggest. He was concerned that Jane was going to get kidnapped and sold into slavery if she went into that port. So they kind of talked about it, and they agreed that that would happen. So some people speculate that this was like the doctor being like racist or something towards Jane, like they didn't want her on the boat with them. But records show that a few months earlier, a similar ship had taken off, and there were 3 men on there. We're going to talk about them in a few weeks. They were on the ship as well, and they got baptized at sea, and the members were really accepting and welcoming of them. And from what we can see, African American members of the church in England did not get the same treatment that our African American brothers and sisters in America got. They were a lot more welcomed in England at the time, probably now. And so we don't think it has anything, like historians say they don't feel like it had anything to do with like not wanting her on the ship or racist. Like everyone felt like it was really genuinely in Jane's best interest to not land in New Orleans. So she got off the ship a day after she got on. So this has been such a process because they had waited weeks and weeks and been delayed. Well, there was another ship leaving around the same time from Liverpool that she was going to get on, the Germanicus, I believe it's called, I don't know. And so she went, and I think she believed either got on or tried to get on, but that was short-lived because after a short time being on that ship as well, I don't even think she took off. It was going to New Orleans also, so she wasn't going to be able to be there either. And so she kind of just sat in Liverpool while the church people that ran the Perpetual Immigration Fund, while they kind of figured out what to do with her. They weren't sure what to do because she was eager, she had been baptized, and they wanted to help her, but they weren't sure like how the safest, best way to make that happen. So she waited there for a few weeks, and they gave her back her 10 pounds. I think they were kind of like, sorry, we're not quite sure what we're gonna do with you, you know? And they gave her back her money. And then eventually we have a record that she got on a ship called the Anglo-Saxon. I had heard of it, so maybe you've heard of it. That's as far as I had known. Like, I've heard of it, that's it. But she boarded the Anglo-Saxon. But the thing is the church's documents show that she was one person that was funded by the Perpetual Immigration Fund on a miscellaneous ship. That is how it's listed. So she went from going with like a whole congregation of saints that were going to travel to the Salt Lake Valley together to being the only member on this ship. Like, who knows at the time? She could have been one of the only women, for all we know, on this ship. Headed not for the US, but headed for Quebec. In Montreal, Canada is where she was headed. And so she got on though, because it's like, was her only chance. And that's April 17th, so it wasn't long, you know, a couple weeks after she had kind of not gotten kicked off, but gotten kicked off the other ships. And so she arrives in Canada, and that is where we lose any kind of record of Jane. We don't know if she, you guys, forget the cookie sheet, it's just moving around. Don't mind me. So we don't know if she ever made it to Salt Lake. There's no record. Like, we don't even know if she made it, honest to Pete, we don't know if she even made it to Quebec. There's record that she got on the ship, and that is it. Nobody knows what happens to Jane after that. So right now, there are like historians that are following her story and early African American members of the church. Right now, they're looking for any record they can to see if they can't find her, like, proof of her arrival there. But so far, not so good. Like, there's just no sign that she even made it there, let alone to Salt Lake. Of course, I mean, there's no record of her having made it to Salt Lake. So that, sadly, is the end of the story of Jane Hunter. That's all we know about her and her trip to the Salt Lake Valley. Okay, so like I said, I make a mess, and there's nothing beautiful or dainty about this process. Like, I bet a lot of you make noodles all the time and you're like, so sad to see this happening. But what I'll do is I'll roll this out until it's like an 1/8 of an inch, maybe even thin, and then I just cut it into the same strips with a cookie cutter. And my soup should be about boiling now, and I just stick it in there and just stir it, and they just cook, and they're delicious. And then my family likes them, likes this soup served over homemade mashed potatoes. Thank you so much for coming to week 8. Is it week 8 of Mix It Up Black History in the Restoration? I hope you enjoyed this story of Jane Hunter, and I can't wait to see you again next week. Goodbye.